Start. Yeah, Dubey sir, now you can go on. Dubey sir, please unmute. Please
Unmute, sir.
unmute. Please
Dubey sir,
unmute, sir.
unmute, please.
Please unmute, sir. Dubey sir, we are not able to listen you. Please unmute. Harshad sir, please say him to unmute. You are not able to unmute. He is not able to unmute. Some problem with this.
Oh, now we can do it, sir. Dubey sir, you can do it.
Yes, I was not allowed to unmute. That's why this delay. I'm sorry about that. I have to be made a co-host. Then only I can unmute myself.
Okay. Right.
Okay. So, good morning, friends. It's a pleasure to be back again this Sunday. And I'm very happy to announce that this morning we have with us Professor Peter Coan, who has very reluctantly agreed to speak to this group. And Peter is going to talk to us on the theme, Can Love Be Taught? So for many of us who don't know Professor Peter Coan, I'll briefly introduce him. Professor Peter Coan is a 54-year-old wanderer from Wigan, England, who has visited 19 countries and lived and worked in 4. His first love was reading, which began around age 6. His second love was computer science, beginning around age 12. And his third love was meditation, which he began to practice at the age of 17. Happily, these 3 loves are not jealous. They coexist easily and indeed work together rather well. Peter learned to meditate after reading a little booklet of Jiddu Krishnamurti's writings, and which spoke about the peace, beauty, and sacred harmony of nature. Krishna said that it was possible to find these things for oneself simply by sitting quietly and exploring one's own awareness. He also said that teachers, organizations, methods, and scriptures were more of an obstacle than help in this regard. Peter wrote a one-line summary of Krishna's teachings in his own words: good teachers teach you not to need a teacher. Unquote. Peter still uses this idea in his work today. As a teacher, Peter is always trying to put himself out of a job. From reading Krishnamurti, Peter felt that simply listening without words might be a good approach to learning meditation. So, with his back against a cherry tree in his father's garden one sunny morning, Peter sat and simply listened. Since then, Peter has wandered all over the world, living at times in England, the Netherlands, France, and Thailand, and doing all kinds of work from gardening to database design and from technical writing to tutoring naughty children in the 13th timetable. Peter has spent the last 16 years living in Phuket, Thailand, with his beautiful wife Sami. For the first few years, Peter taught computers, maths, and English at a local high school. Then he moved to the local university where Peter has been working ever since. He teaches academic writing, creative writing, and various other courses, all of which he enjoys. He is also involved in research, mostly into the teaching of English using extensive reading as the primary methodology. There are other bureaucratic problems and administrative issues of various kinds, which of course Peter does not enjoy. But no life can be perfect or entirely free from suffering, and this one is not so bad. He also spends a lot of time meditating, especially on his favorite sunset beach, where he can be often found doing yoga, juggling, typing poetry on his phone, or just sitting. One Friday morning in 2012, Peter had a very strange experience. He woke up completely happy. Excuse me. This was totally unexpected, and Peter still has no good explanation for it. The world itself was still the same, and so was he, and yet his subjective perception of both was entirely different. Peter was suddenly in heaven. Excuse me. The wonder and awe of it continued to amaze him for several weeks. But eventually he either got used to it or it faded away. It is difficult to be sure which. Since then, Peter has been writing poetry and has occasional contributions to the field of non-dual philosophy, mostly just for friends on Facebook rather than on any wider audience. At some point, Peter may well publish a book of his ideas, probably beginning with a book of non-dual poetry. He has one almost finished. Peter is also writing a slightly more serious work in which he tried to set out the formal basis for non-dual philosophy in a clear and coherent way, without resorting to either dogma or pseudoscience. So far, he has not published any such work. With these words, I once again uh, offer a very warm welcome to Professor Peter Coan and also want to be thankful to him on behalf of Krishnamurti Circle Indore that he has spared his time and is with us today to talk about Can Love Be Taught? So, Peter, it's all yours now. You can unmute yourself and then begin.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. I hope that introduction wasn't too long. I saw from the email that I've been promoted to professor. I should say I'm not a professor. I'm a humble teacher. I don't have the status of a professor, so I don't know how the word professor crept into my bio there. I certainly didn't put it there. Anyway, so the question is, can love be taught? And of course, Krishnamurti gave a very clear answer to that. So let's start with that. Share my little presentation. Hope you guys can see that okay. What's going on here? There we go. So I hope you can see that okay. So can love be taught? And we're going to look at that in terms of the teachings of Jiddu Krishnamurti to some extent. So here's a good place to begin. Love cannot be taught, nor is it to be found in any book. So that's what Krishnamurti said at Rajghat in India in 1963. So that's a long time ago, isn't it? 60 years ago. He was talking about this. However, Krishnamurti then, well, what he was already doing at that talk and what he carried on doing until he was 90 years old is going around giving public talks where, if you listen to what he was saying, he was trying to teach people or trying to encourage people or trying to point people in the direction of love. He also said love is truth. And of course, truth is a pathless land. What does that mean? So we'll go into that a little bit, I think. Why does he say that love cannot be taught? Love cannot be found in any book. So it's pretty clear that he's saying words are not love. We can't define love in words. That's pretty clear, I think. And yet love is real. Love is not something that's absent from the universe. He's not saying there's no such thing as love. He's not saying there's no such thing as truth. He's just saying we can't teach these things and we can't define them in words. So we've got this thing that's real, very important, love and truth. Nobody's denying that these things are important. They matter. They may be more important than anything else. And yet we can't really say what they are. We can't define them. We can write books about them. We can talk about them for hours, but we can't accurately define them in words. So one way to begin to try to crack this impossible problem is to look at the etymology of the word love. Of course, etymology meaning the history of the word. Where does it come from? So Old English, it's an Old English Germanic word, much the same meaning that it's popularly given now, so deep affection. From a very old root, from the language before either Sanskrit or Latin or Germanic, when we had this Proto-Indo-European language, which linguists tell us was the shared language from which all Indian and European languages descend. So Sanskrit, we have lubhyati, desires. So that's interesting because, of course, Krishnamurti said love is not desire. And in English as well, we can see that love and lust are clearly not the same thing. They're related sometimes in a strange way, but very often they're actually opposite, aren't they? Lust, maybe I have a lust for a new pretty girlfriend, which is in conflict with my love for my wife, for example, just to take a very simple example. But also we could, following Krishnamurti, we can say that pleasure, the desire for short-term pleasure, operates in conflict or operates to prevent the enjoyment of what in a sense is a deeper pleasure, which is love, truth, spirituality, meditation, awareness. If we're hunting after the next glass of whiskey or the next pretty girl or whatever it may be that we're lusting after, the next promotion or the next pile of money, then that acquisitive desire, that desire for the future to have something, to become something, that obstructs our ability to enjoy love, which is truth, which is present in the present moment. Yeah, I think that's quite interesting to point that out, the relationship between time and love compared to the relationship between time and lust. So lust is about the future, desire for pleasure. I want something, I reach out and try and grab it. That's the future, that's time, as Krishnamurti puts it. Whereas love is truth, which is what is, it's right here in the present. So from this etymology then, we have this idea of deep affection. And the Sanskrit word lubhyati meaning desires, Latin word libet, to please, to be, it is pleasurable, would be another way of saying that. So when we look at the etymology, we see that Krishnamurti is actually being quite radical in what he says. He's not using the standard language. He's redefining the words in quite a radical way. So what Krishnamurti is calling love is not the same thing that linguistically the word love historically means. Historically, love does come from these words which mean desire, pleasure, sexual desire. The word libido comes from the same root. And also this interesting little bit of linguistics here, this archaic English phrase, by your leave. In more modern English, we would say, please. So by your leave, I will talk for an hour. Please, if it pleases you, if it gives you pleasure, I will talk for an hour. So leave in this sense also means love. If this is what you love, if this is what gives you pleasure. So these ideas of love and pleasure are in a way the same, and yet Krishnamurti is saying, no, I want to redefine the word love so that it only points to this experience, this very particular type of perceiving the world, which is awareness in the present moment without time. This very old-fashioned way of talking about it, this word leaf. I would as lief go into the dragon's den as stay here waiting. So this is interesting because it's about choice, it's about preference. It's a way of saying, in this very old-fashioned, very archaic English, it's a way of saying, this is what I choose. This is my heart's desire. This is my heart wish. And that's another interesting phrase, heart wish. The Buddhists use that quite a lot, especially the Western Buddhist order. There's a very nice lady called Lama Shenpen Hukam, who is an English Buddhist teacher who spent a long time in Tibet studying with the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And she talks a lot about the heart wish, by which means the same thing as bodhicitta, the idea of the desire to end suffering for the self and for all beings. So there's this idea of in Buddhism, the idea of the ultimate desire, the desire that motivates all human action in a way. And even beyond human action, even animals have this same desire. If an animal is suffering, maybe it's hungry, so the animal naturally moves towards food to end the suffering. So the movement to end suffering is a very deep thing. It's part of consciousness. It's even deeper than human. It predates human brains. It's more fundamental even than intelligence, the desire to end suffering, which we can use the term heart wish. And that's also kind of implied in this, I would as lief. So it's saying, what would I love to do more? What does my heart want to do? So that's just an interesting little detour into the words, the history of the words. So I picked up on, in the last slide, it mentioned deep affection was the oldest definition I could find for a cognate, this cognate lufu. So what are the characteristics then of deep affection, which is love, compared to superficial affection, which maybe we can say it's pleasure, or it's not love, or it's, I don't know, maybe we can think of it as a kind of undeveloped love, or a love which is not quite what we would like it to be, or yeah, superficial love compared to deep love. So we have the idea of understanding in depth compared to lacking deep understanding. So superficial love, we look at appearance, we see maybe a beautiful girl or a handsome guy, whatever it is that we're attracted to, and we feel some interest or some attraction in that, but that's not deep understanding. And this idea of depth is very interesting, the idea of profundity, to be profound, to be deep in an intellectual sense, but maybe even more deeply than an intellectual sense. If we go into feelings, and even more deeply than feelings, into the nature of what it is to be, then we're really starting to get quite deep. A superficial idea is very easy to describe in words, isn't it? I can have a very superficial idea, like he is tall, the tree is green. Okay, that's very easy to say in words. But a deeper idea, like this tree is made of trillions of cells, each of them are unique, each of them has its own history. All right, and now we're starting to see the complexity of what being is. Being is very, very deep, very, very profound. For something to exist, it's interconnected with everything else. It has a history which is billions of years old. It's incredibly deep, incredibly profound, incredibly difficult to accurately describe. So we have connection with meaning. What is meaning? Yeah, what's the meaning of life? So these kind of questions. Of course, love, we could say love is the meaning of life. There's an interesting synonym, isn't it? If we have love, then there's no question of does life have a meaning? Well, yes, it does. I feel love. This is the meaning. If you're in love, you don't have any question about meaning. Compared to a superficial approach in which there is a lack of meaning. And we often see people saying, oh, for me, life has no meaning. I don't know what anything means. I have no sense of connection. People are very lonely. I think people have always been very lonely, but perhaps these days more so because of Facebook, which can be a very isolating technology. Smartphones should help us to connect better with each other, but there's a lot of research showing that the more time people spend on smartphones, the more they feel lonely and isolated. So there's an issue there. What we want to have is deep, meaningful connections, which is love. What we have instead is very superficial, shallow connections where we have a pretty girl takes a picture of herself in a bikini and 10,000 boys click like. And what does that mean? Where's the profundity in that? Where's the connection in it? Very, very little. And then that girl gets depressed and goes off and commits suicide or something like that. This happens. So this is a quite important thing, I think, the difference between deep, meaningful connections and superficial, shallow connections which do not have meaning. So then we've got the idea of time, how that comes in. If something's deep, it's permanent, or, well, long-lasting. I try to avoid this word permanent because actually nothing is permanent. That's one of the great insights of the Buddha, anicca, the idea that everything is changing, and that's a fact. We can look and see everything is changing. Even a mountain is changing. It's changing very slowly by our standards, but it's changing. There's nothing that's not changing. So nothing is permanent, but some things are more permanent than others. Some things are changing more slowly than others. So when we talk about deep affection, which is love, we're maybe talking about something that has a long time in it. And maybe also this other sense of timelessness, which is it's here and now. It's what is. It's not a projection about the future. It's not remembered from the past. It is here now. And that's love, right? So compare that to a superficial thing, which is temporary, ephemeral meaning it's here and gone, like somebody clicking like on Facebook and 10 minutes later they've forgotten it. So surface appearances, temporary, ephemeral, these kinds of love are not very satisfying. Not what Krishnamurti was talking about when he was talking about love, and also not what the original meaning of the word love is. So then, last point here, integration within the whole of one's life. So real love is the whole of life, isn't it? It's everything, actually. That's maybe quite a good definition of love, isn't it? Everything. Truth. What is truth? Well, truth is all of what is. It's absolutely everything. So to say it's integrated within the whole of one's life is actually an inadequate definition, because it's not that it's a separate thing that's integrated, like an add-on extra. It actually is the whole of your life. So love is life. compare that with a superficial thing which is not integrated. It's a bolt-on added extra. So let's go and have a look at this next Krishnamurti quote. Oh, I dropped the I there. Sorry for the spelling mistake. So that should say, if you have not got love, not just in little drops, but in abundance, if you are not filled with it, the world will go to disaster. So this is a very doom-laden statement from Krishnamurti. He likes these very absolute statements, doesn't he? If you don't love enough, the world will be destroyed. This is maybe quite a heavy statement to give to someone, isn't it? You can imagine that people might respond to this in quite extreme ways. Is love something that we can have? I mean, here he says, if you have not got love. But I think if we look at other statements that Krishnamurti has made, he also says, love is not something you can have. It's not something you can get, because it's something that the world is, in fact. It's something that maybe you are and maybe the world is. So to think of love as something you have is actually a little bit wrong. So he's kind of contradicting himself here, as Krishnamurti often does. And yet, what he's saying has validity, and it's well worth having a look at it. So he's saying, if you've not got love, I think the way I would edit this to make it more accurate, what I would say is, if you have not got the awareness of love. And I think we can understand a lot of Krishnamurti's statements about love better if we add that into his descriptions, into a lot of his ideas, not all of his ideas, but quite a lot of his ideas about love. He's using the word love as a shorthand when he's really talking about awareness of love. Maybe we could even say the integration of love into one's life. Love is always present. Truth is always present. The world is always present, and the world is love. But we're not always aware of it. We're often distracted by our lusts and our sufferings and our self-pity and all the other negative emotions. So we're distracted from love. We're distracted from truth. We don't notice it. We just carry on doing stupid things. And we walk straight past the love and truth and beauty that is available for us. So awareness of love is maybe what he's talking about here. So if you've not got awareness of love, not just in little drops, but in abundance, if you're not filled with it, then the world will go to disaster. To say the world will go, maybe your subjective world will be a disaster, won't it? If one person doesn't achieve an awareness of love, that's hardly going to cause Armageddon. Probably, I suppose it might do. There's the butterfly effect and so on, isn't there? Maybe one person not loving enough might cause a nuclear war. But maybe he's talking really about your world rather than the world. And in that sense, there's no doubt about it. It's absolutely right. If you don't love, if you are not aware of love, if your life has no meaning and no truth and no connection to reality, if you don't have positive feelings and connections in your life, that's a disaster. It's a disaster for you, and also probably not ideal for all the people you come into contact with who otherwise might benefit from a loving, kind, honest person. And instead, maybe what they're meeting is somebody who's superficial, in a hurry, self-obsessed, greedy, fearful, angry, neglectful. And we all do this, right? I'm not saying that some people have negative emotions and some people don't. We all sometimes miss opportunities to be aware of truth. We all sometimes miss opportunities to be aware of love. And when we do that, it is a disaster. We've missed something important. We've missed that moment. So when we talk about teaching love, this is what we're trying to do, isn't it? It's what everybody's trying to do. It's what Buddha was trying to do. It's what Jesus was trying to do. To make people love. and it's a very, very difficult thing, very difficult. But we want to do it because we don't want the world to go to disaster. So, you know, intellectually, Krishnamurti says, you know intellectually that the unity of mankind is essential. And that love is the only way. So here he's talking about war and nationalism, isn't he? The unity of mankind means the negation of nationalism, the negation of racism, the negation of sexism. So if we're going to have the unity of mankind, that means men and women have to start being nice to each other. Indians and Pakistanis have to be nice to each other. Russians and Ukrainians have to express love for each other. Now, can we do that? So intellectually, I'm sure that many people in Pakistan, many people in India, many people in Russia, and many people in Ukraine will agree that with that yes, love is the way. We want to love each other. And yet instead, what are we doing? So who is going to teach you how to love? This is a problem. Who is going to go and talk to Vladimir Putin or Vladimir Zelensky and say, you know, how about loving your friend over there, over the other side of the barbed wire? How do we have that conversation? Will any authority, any method, any system tell you how to love? So maybe we should talk about that and explain why it's obvious that the answer to that is no. So what is a method? So a method is a program. It's set out in very firm, solid blocks. It's an algorithm. So is there an algorithm for love? Do this, do that, if this, then that. Yeah, this is not love. This is like trying to build a tree out of Lego, isn't it? You could build something that's roughly the same shape as a tree out of Lego, but it won't be a tree. It won't be able to have seeds and flowers and so on because it lacks the complexity of a tree. To model the entire universe would require a system that is more complex than the universe. And this is why we can't make an accurate model of the universe. And since we can't make an accurate model, any model that we do make is inaccurate. It's oversimplified. And therefore, it's not love. It lacks that depth. It's superficial. Any system is superficial. Any method is superficial. Anything written in a book is superficial. It doesn't have the depth even of a human brain, a human mind. I wonder if I'm explaining this clearly. If we think about the complexity of being, the complexity of a tree, a real tree with its millions of roots and all the bacteria growing in the roots and the trillions of cells and the leaves and the genetic history of it and the different viruses in it and the birds nesting in it, and all of this is part of the real tree. What the tree is, the complexity of it is vast. And then you think of a human mental model. So I can look out of the window right now. There's a tamarind tree outside. I've seen that tamarind tree 1,000,000 times. Well, probably a few thousand times. I have a picture in my mind of it. I can remember where the branches are, where the leaves are. I know where the kingfisher likes to sit and so on. So that's a much less complex model than the reality. And then the words that I've just used to describe the tree to you are again much less complex than that. I've described a few simple words, not nearly as complex as the image in my mind of the tree. So we've got 3 levels of complexity. The words, very, very simple, very superficial. The mental image, a little bit more complex, but still not very accurate. And the reality, which is incredibly complex beyond the ability of a human mind to contain. So all the information about a single tree is vastly more complex than a single human mind can contain, let alone all the information about a human being, such as my wife, for example. So the extent to which I know my wife is very, very limited compared to the extent to which my wife is. So where did we get? So this is why no method, no system can teach us how to love, because methods are superficial, systems are super. So this is somebody else telling me what to do. Again, very, very superficial. If somebody else is telling you what to do, you don't even have your own mind to rely on. You have to rely on the words coming out from the authority's mind. So that's a very, very poor way to govern your behavior. That's not love. So will any authority, any method, any system tell you how to love? Well, it might, but it won't do it very well. It'll do a lousy job of telling you how to love. If anyone tells you, it is not love. Exactly. The information that is contained in a few words is very superficial. It's not deep. It's not complex enough. It's not love. Can you say, I will practice being kind and gentle and force myself to pay attention to others? Well, you can. You can try that. It's not so wrong, is it? If someone says, oh, you know, I've been a bad person all my life, but I'm going to change from now on. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be gentle. I'm going to force myself to pay attention to others. That would actually be quite a good thing to do, wouldn't it? I don't think it would be a bad thing to do. But how could it work in practice? It's quite difficult to change habits. It's quite difficult to change ingrained responses and character, isn't it? So if you have a long history of being cruel and selfish, then deciding to be kind from now on, yeah, you know, it might work. It might work. I wouldn't completely negate that. I think there's some power in that, actually. If you look at the 12-step programs, they're quite an interesting model for this. So I'm sure many of you know the 12-step programs for things like Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. So these are programs that aim to change people's behavior, to change people's habits and character through a series of spiritual practices, really. Part of it is accepting that truth, which is love, which they call a higher power, is something bigger than you, which you don't control. That's one of the first of the 12 steps. So yeah, and the 12-step program has quite a good record. It doesn't work for everybody, but quite a lot of people, millions of people, have been able to transform their lives using the 12-step program from being an alcoholic or a heroin addict with all the problems that involves. They've managed to quit that and turn their lives around and become more productive and maybe happier, maybe more loving members of the community. So this is not such a bad idea, I think, to practice being kind and gentle and force myself to pay attention to others. I think there's some room in that. But then he goes on, do you mean to say that you can discipline yourself to love, exercise the will to love? It's interesting, isn't it? So there's this word discipline is very interesting, I think. There's two types of discipline, aren't there? Internal discipline and external discipline. So external discipline is the guy with a stick standing over you saying, you must love. If you don't love, I'm going to hit you. We can see that that might be a little bit problematic, yes? But then there's internal discipline. So there's the idea of a person, there's me deciding, you know, I've been really mean to my wife. Maybe I should be a bit nicer in future. So that kind of discipline, I think there may be some space for that. The will to love. Of course, what Krishnamurti is saying is that will is kind of the opposite to love. And this is an idea that comes up a lot in New Age philosophy. I think it actually goes back to Ledbetter, the idea that will is, which we can sometimes call ego, is the opposite of love in a way, is something that blocks love. I'm not so sure that that's entirely true, but that's what he's saying here. So I'll skip over that, and maybe we can discuss that later if anybody else has any insights into that, whether will is compatible with love. That's an interesting question, I think. So this is a something that a friend of mine posted on Facebook yesterday, and I thought this fits in quite nicely with this talk. Carl Gustav Jung is saying, if a man knows more than others, he becomes lonely. So this is true, obviously, in a straightforward sense. Krishnamurti likes to talk about aloneness, being alone, which is the essential precondition for meditation. And that being alone is not being lonely, or at least not necessarily. It's possible to be alone and be very, very happy and feel that you have plenty of good company. But I think what interested me about this image is that when we talk about teaching love, as people who maybe study Krishnamurti or Buddhism or Hinduism, people who have explored these ideas about what is love, what is God, what is truth. If you spend a few years thinking about these things and meditating and doing various kinds of spiritual work, does that make you know more than others about love? Can you know about love even? To know love, I think we've already said that to know love is not possible because love is the world, love is vastly complex. Our minds are quite small. We're not clever enough to know love. But we can certainly know things about love, and we can certainly feel love. We can benefit from love. We can help other people, which is love. But we do, don't we? We want to teach love. So if I'm happy and I see a group of people who are not happy, I want to do something, don't I? I want to go and teach them. That's a very natural human experience, I think. I don't know if loneliness is the right word. There's this natural expansiveness that we all want to help each other. And I think I mentioned before the idea of the heart wish or bodhicitta, the idea of wisdom mind is the literal translation, which is the desire to end suffering in self and others, which is right at the root of the mind. It's what motivates us to end suffering for me and for everybody else. And even animals have that. You know, you see animals helping other animals. They don't want suffering. So that's quite interesting. And yeah, these were some ideas that came to my mind after looking at that picture. The idea that it's a little bit lonely to feel love. I mean, what's it like to be in a country which is very nationalist and militaristic? So everybody around you is waving flags and saying, let's go and bomb this other country, they deserve it. Let's kill them all, our country is great. And you are in the small minority of people who is saying, well, actually, I don't agree. I think that we should find better ways to solve our problems rather than firing missiles at each other. There's a certain loneliness in that. And I think most of us have probably experienced that in one form or another. So this is very old story of the Greek prophetess Cassandra, which you probably all know. So the curse was that she could see the future and she could tell people about the future and everything she said would be accurate, but nobody would believe her. So it's an incredibly lonely situation. Of course, this is a classic Greek tragedy. And many of us these days feel like that. I mean, I've been talking about climate change since 1988. Nobody listened to anything I said, and now we have hurricanes and droughts and millions of people dying, and that's going to get worse and worse. And still today, the world's governments are not in a position to do anything about it. Nothing. No government can do anything because every nation wants to compete against all its neighbors. And so if one country bans fossil fuels and switches to electric cars, there's a huge cost to that. And that will make it very easy for the neighboring nation with its petrol tanks to invade and take over. And so competitive advantage, the rules of competitive advantage mean that as long as the nations are competing with each other, nobody can stop burning fossil fuels. It's the tragedy of the commons, isn't it? So we're all burning fossil fuels, we're all killing our environment, and we will all suffer as a result. Of course, we won't all suffer equally. The people who are shareholders in oil companies, the billionaires and so on, they will do perfectly okay. They'll carry on living in nice gated communities in places that still have water. But for poor people, this means that life is going to become very, very difficult over the next few years, much more difficult than it has been in the past. So yes, this is a familiar type of loneliness for everybody who's been talking about these problems. The problem of nationalism, of course, is one that Krishnamurti talked about very, very clearly. It's maybe the most easy point of Krishnamurti's teachings that anybody can understand. Nationalism doesn't help. if you are, you know, it's interesting for me as an Englishman talking to you guys who are mostly Indian, I think. So the British Empire was a nationalist project about waving the Union Jack and British people are the best, British values are the best. And quite rightly, Indian people rebelled against that, and much bloodshed and abuse followed. But eventually, 1945, the first general election ever in which the British people voted for a socialist government, a Labour government, in fact, the Labour Party, which was partly founded by the Fabian Society, which itself was partly founded by Annie Besant, Krishnamurti's adoptive mother. So massive, massive impact that lady had, Annie Besant, incredible figure in history. But this idea of nationalism in a uniquely Indian context, nationalism came to mean the resistance against British imperialism. And that's an unfortunate misunderstanding, because nationalism is not the resistance against imperialism. Nationalism is imperialism. It's just imperialism waving a different flag. So this is, of course, Britain now. Britain is such a mess. Britain has gone in the space of 150 years or so because of nationalism and this kind of very backward-looking, aggressive, militaristic philosophy that it's mostly had over most of Britain's history. Britain now has gone down to the point where it's one of the poorest countries in Europe. Yeah, so nationalism, yeah, it's quite difficult because people, almost everybody has a sense of attachment to their nation. We're very, very deeply conditioned in this. I've lived for the last 20 years outside of England. I've done everything I possibly can to not think of myself as English, and yet I still have that conditioning. I do still feel that I'm English. Very, very difficult thing to fully get rid of. And as Krishnamurti points out, as long as there is that identification, there's violence, there's conflict, there's a sense of separation between the people of this nationality and the people of another nationality. So I think it's a challenge that we all have to fight together, is the sense that each of us have of belonging to a nation rather than belonging to humanity or belonging to the planet. And I think Krishnamurti was one of the most convincing speakers on that. This recognition that nationalism is a big, big problem, much bigger than most people realize. And what the schools do all over the world, I think in every country, I don't think there's a single country that's an exception to this, is that the schools teach nationalism. The schools have children waving the flag and singing these songs about "I sacrifice my blood." This is the Thai national anthem. It has a line in it that says something like, I willingly sacrifice every drop of my blood for the glory of the Thai nation. So you've got little 8-year-old girls singing this every day, actually. This is to see this all over the world. Children being taught to sacrifice their blood for the glory of the flag and the glory of the nation. So, yeah, this is another thing I was going to say about this, is that hate absolutely can be taught. We've said that love maybe cannot be taught. Hate can be taught. And nationalism is a brick in that wall. Nationalism implies hating the other nations, and with that we have racism and sexism and all the rest of it. So we can definitely learn, and people do learn. People are conditioned very heavily to hate. And so if we want to challenge that conditioning and suggest that maybe there are ways in which individual people can see through that conditioning, then Krishnamurti's teachings are very, very relevant in that, I think. Okay, so next quote here, Terence Mckenna. So I don't know if you guys know Terence Mckenna, very good public speaker. He's dead now, unfortunately. He was a big campaigner for, what did he call it? I remember, I forget the technical name, but basically psychedelic drugs coming from plants. So things like magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, DMT, these kind of drugs which people take not for recreational purposes, in in general, but for therapeutic or spiritual purposes, to meet God, if you like, or to experience what we're talking about today, to experience love, to experience truth, to experience oneness with nature. So Terence McKenna wrote some good books and gave some good talks. This is one of my favorite quotes from him. He says, "If the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed." So this is directly looking at this same problem, the truth. How do we teach the truth, which is love? We have a world in which billions of people believe in hate. They all believe their nation is the best and should go to war with all the other nations. How do we teach them the truth? So Terence McKenna is saying, if we can tell the truth in such a way that people can understand it, then they will believe it. The problem is that the truth is complex. The truth is complex. You can't always tell the truth in a 5-second soundbite. Truth is profound, it's deep, it's complex. Lies are superficial and easy. It's easy to say, you know, English people are evil, or Indian people are evil, or Pakistani people are evil. This is very, very easy to say. Very superficial idea, so we can teach that so easily. But teaching the opposite, or not even the opposite, but teaching the reality, which is truth and love, is a much bigger task, much more difficult. So I've said here that McKenna was too optimistic. I'm not sure he was right, because very often I think people do understand when we talk about things like climate change, fossil fuels, when we talk to rich people about maybe sharing some of their wealth instead of keeping it all for themselves, I think they understand that quite well. But it's not in their own short-term interest, and so they don't believe it in the sense of they don't act on it. Another good example of this is people who are addicted to smoking cigarettes. I'm sure we've all had the conversation where somebody's smoking a cigarette and they say, oh, you know, those things are not good for you. And they say, oh, rubbish, they're fine. My grandfather was a heavy smoker. He lived until he was 89 years old. He used to smoke 40 a day all his life. He worked in a coal mine, so 12-hour shifts underground up to his neck in water, hacking coal in a coal seam for 50 years, working 6 days a week, and then outside the coal mine, smoking cigarettes and drinking beer. He lived till he was 89, so that's a good innings. But when you try to talk to someone who smokes cigarettes, they immediately respond, no, I don't believe all that. That's not true. Smoking is fine. I think they understand that smoking is not fine, that it's damaging their health, but they choose to pretend not to believe it. It's not in their short-term interest, because their short-term interest is enjoying the hit of cigarette, which gets rid of their withdrawal symptoms for a few minutes. So yeah, this is the problem we have when we're trying to teach love, isn't it? People tend to believe what's in their short-term interest, and that might be lust rather than love. It might be pleasure rather than love. It might be the superficial rather than the profound. So this is the problem, to try to touch people, to reach people at a profound level when what's superficial is acting against it. Yeah, the old comedian Groucho Marx had this famous line, you can't talk a monkey into sharing his banana. And that's the problem when you're talking about things like greed and selfishness. People who benefit from nationalism, such as nationalist politicians, for instance, capitalists who are selling guns and bombs, making a lot of money out of that, the oil companies. You can't talk a monkey into sharing his banana. And of course, human beings are monkeys, literally. We are a type of monkey. So we shouldn't expect that we would be any better than a monkey. The miracle is that sometimes we are better than monkeys. Sometimes we do share our banana. It's an incredible thing, but miraculously it happens, doesn't it? Sometimes we do look in a more profound way. Sometimes we do act ethically, even when it's against our short-term interests. And that's a beautiful thing. We shouldn't forget that. I sometimes feel reading Krishnamurti that he skips past that too much. He neglects the many good people and good things that there are in the world sometimes in some of the things he says. Maybe that's not his fault. It's in the nature of words that we always oversimplify. We always miss out many interesting things. Whatever we're talking about, we could have put it better. Whatever we're talking about, we only give a superficial analysis because that's all words can do. So let's move on. I hope this is all clear. If anybody has any questions or wants to butt in, you're very welcome. Anybody have any comments or anything you want to add?
I think Harshad, Dr. Harshad Parekh.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Unmute yourself, sir.
Yeah.
Hello, Harshad. Do you have a comment?
Hello, Peter Coan.
Hello,
nice
sir.
to listen to you. Nice to see you. And I want to make some comments. I like to say that once two men came to Krishna Ji and they were discussing about love. And these two men told Krishna Ji that the more we have discussed, the clearer it has become, the problem of love. And then Krishna Ji asked, has love become clear, or what do you think about it? So we know everything about love in words, but the real thing is different. And there is one folk song in Hindi. It says that everybody talks about love, but nobody really loves, because if a person really loves, he will not be separate from the world. So this is a folk song. And Krishna Ji says, where self is, love is not. So as long as we are thinking, imagining, there is no love. But in the state where our mind is very, very quiet and we see everything non-verbally, very beautifully, everything fresh, then I would say that is a state in which there is love. And one sentence of Krishna Ji, which made me think for many, many years, and that was, love in relationship is a purifying process, as it leads to the revelation of itself. And without this revelation, relationship has very little significance. So Krishna Ji writes very, very beautifully, especially in commentaries on living. And the people who are very sensitive, they can catch what Krishna Ji is trying to express, because I feel that what Krishna Ji is expressing is coming from the real love. And so some people are able to connect very, very non-verbally with Krishna Ji. So I think that is all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Harshad bhai. I think Mr. Pradeep Verma wants to say something. Yes, unmute yourself.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Peter? Yeah.
Yes.
I would love to share a few more sayings of JK on love. He said, love and freedom go together. Love and freedom go together. Then it's a state of vulnerability. Then love leads to right action. And love is not demanding. So these sayings lead us to greater depths. That is what I feel. Now, two small questions to Peter. First question is, after knowing so much about love, what do you feel love is? First question. Then the next one is, tell us something about non-dual poetry and its relationship with love.
Excellent. Excellent. Good questions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
When we say non-dual, dual is always there, I suppose, intellectually in the mind. This is what I feel. And to me, love is a sustained feeling of fullness that cannot be verbalized. Being in love connects with anything, everything, without reactions. Of course, love cannot be taught. What I think is, one thing I can say is a good teacher cannot be very effective without love being his real nature, essential nature. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that sounds pretty much right to me. I would add to that there isn't really a question of whether love is not the essential nature of a teacher. If we think about any person, what is their essential nature? Even if you think about the worst person you can think of, you think about Adolf Hitler or whatever person you dislike most, what's their essential nature? Once you've asked the question, it's pretty clear. The person exists in reality. They're part of the truth. They're part of what is. So the essential nature of all beings is love. It can't be anything else. So in that sense, what we're always doing is love. Even if we're being, we're causing wars, or we're lying and stealing, whatever horrible things we're doing, that's part of the process of life. It's part of nature. It's part of evolution. People are learning things from it, whether we consciously are teaching those things or not. A good example is Hitler. Before Hitler, racism was universally accepted, pretty much. Almost everybody was racist and they thought racism was great. Certainly in Europe and America. After Hitler, we learned something. International society learnt something interesting. Certainly the European society and the American society learnt something interesting. We learnt that racism is a bad idea. Racism has negative consequences. And that idea is still very, very deep in European culture and American culture. Maybe now it's starting to fade away as the generations pass. But words like Auschwitz, genocide, gas chambers, these words still have very, very deep meaning to almost everybody. Certainly of my generation. Maybe the younger generation has not really been taught as thoroughly as they should about those things. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that love is always there. Even in the worst situations, love is there. There's a very beautiful book by Viktor Frankl. I think it's called Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl was an inmate in several concentration camps. He was a Jewish guy in Germany in World War II. And what he says is that in those camps, in the most horrendous circumstances you can imagine, watching people die, being brutalized in every possible way, love was still there, truth was still there. He talks about seeing a ray of sun coming through the bars of his window and striking a little bird that was sitting there, and the incredible beauty of it. Love and truth are still there, even in the most horrendous circumstances. So maybe part of the positive side of this statement that love cannot be taught is that love is always there, even if we don't teach it, even if we don't try to teach it. Everything is constantly teaching love to everybody. Whether people are aware of that and they pick up on that is a different question. But the whole of reality is teaching that all the time. Ramana Maharshi said, the whole world was my guru. And I think that's very much this in line with Krishnamurti's teachings as well, isn't it? The truth is, I'm sure he wouldn't use the word guru, but the truth is the teacher. And actually, a human teacher can just get in the way. But yeah, if a teacher is loving in the relationship with the student, does that help? Yeah, I mean, it's got to, doesn't it? If the teacher is aggressive and violent and abusive, then that's not an ideal teaching situation, clearly. Yeah. So there were a couple of questions you asked me there. Oh, sorry, what did I do there? Oh, yeah, sorry. So yeah, you asked a couple of questions there. The other one, I think you asked, what is non-dual poetry? Which is a great question. So non-dual poetry is poetry that aims to bring the reader from a state of duality, suffering, misery, pain, towards a state of awareness of love, which is non-duality, which is the freedom from suffering. So obviously that's a lot to ask of a poem, but there are poems that do it, right? If you read Rumi or Walt Whitman or
Yes.
yeah, Krishnamurti from time to time, you can have that experience sometimes. If you get the right poem at the right moment, it can lead your mind from suffering into freedom. And yeah, as you rightly said, duality is mental. Duality is only in the mind. Our minds divide the world in two to simplify things, to make it possible for our minds to do their clever little calculations and work things out. Duality is very useful. Because of duality, we can count, we have maths. These are very useful things. But in terms of emotion and feeling and love, spirituality, this is where we temporarily suspend duality and instead look at non-duality, which is the truth, which is reality, which is love, with no boundaries.
Will you share one poem of yours, non-dual?
Oh, share a non-dual poem. Oh, I hadn't prepared for this question. I suppose I should have done. Just a minute. Let me see if I can. Well, I'll look for one. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, here's a nice easy one. Let's share this. Nice short poem. Only the body ages and dies. Only the ego worries and suffers. Beyond all suffering, beyond all death, that which is real lives on. That's very sweet, very short and simple, very superficial, actually, isn't it? There's nothing profound there. And yet that's kind of saying the same thing that we've been saying today, that intellectual suffering is most of our suffering. Some of our suffering is physical suffering as well. My body gets old, I hurt my body. But beyond all of that, even beyond the death of the body, reality is going to carry on being love. This is maybe an idea that's a little bit different to reincarnation in the conventional sense of the idea that the individual person, when their body dies, the soul moves on and is born in a new body. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that what's real is love, and love will continue, reality will continue even when this body dies. And so what's bad in me, my ego, if you like, this word ego is not one I use very often, actually, because it's so easy to misunderstand. Ego is a false idea that's created by the mind, dividing the mind in two. So ego is all the bad things in the mind. This is a very simplified model of the mind. So yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Love is only love is non-dual. Yeah, thank you very much. Love continues. Thanks.
Okay. So is that enough? All right. So shall I go on with my little?
Yes, please.
Go on with my little presentation.
Yeah.
Okay. So. Ooh, sorry. Can you guys see that? Okay. That's bigger. So here's this next line then. Without beauty and love, there is no truth. So Krishnamurti says this kind of thing a lot. He could equally well have said, without truth and love, there is no beauty. And in fact, I think he does say that somewhere else. So he uses these three terms interchangeably. And I think that's quite an important insight as well. When we ask, what is non-dual reality? Well, non-dual reality is beauty. Non-dual reality is love. Non-dual reality is truth. The fact, what is, that's what it is. Love, truth, and beauty. So these words are synonyms, essentially. Where there is sorrow, there cannot be love. So sorrow meaning intellectual suffering, isn't it? So the idea of where ideas are causing pain, ideas are blocking our awareness of love. Again here, where there is sorrow, there cannot be love. What he's really saying is, where there is sorrow, there cannot be awareness of love. Love still exists. Reality hasn't stopped being loving and kind. Just because I'm full of sorrow, I'm angry, whatever it is, I'm not aware of love right now because I'm so angry. But love continues quite happily. The rest of the world continues. You know, mothers love their children, the children love their mothers. My anger doesn't actually stop that happening. But what it does stop is my awareness of love. Where there is sorrow, there cannot be awareness of love. And again, that's a little bit too binary, actually, isn't it, to be true? If we really drill down into it, it's impossible to have a mind without sorrow. So the Buddhists have this idea, I'm sure you've seen the Bodhisattva vow, which is the vow that as long as there is suffering in the world, may I be reborn again and again to help suffering beings. Basically, if I am completely free from suffering, and then I read a newspaper and I read about what's happening in Yemen and Ukraine and so on and so on, there's suffering, right? There's sorrow. unless I'm a psychopath, I have some empathy, so I can't help but suffer because of the suffering that other people are experiencing. So there can still be love at the same time as sorrow. In fact, as I said, empathy is a form of love. I think most people would agree with that. And empathy is also a form of sorrow. So if I see a starving baby, I feel sorrow because I feel love. So I think Krishnamurti here, this particular sentence, it's too binary, isn't it? It doesn't capture accurately the complexity of the whole. And really, I shouldn't attack Krishnamurti for that, because it's the nature of words that they're always too binary. Words are always too low resolution. They can't capture the complexity of reality. So what he's saying there is partly true. It's a helpful insight that when we're suffering, when we're full of sorrow, when we're full of negative emotion, it's very difficult to love in that condition. And so quite important to take the time to step back when we are feeling lots of negative emotion, take the time out to work on that, meaning to be aware of it and to really look at it and to understand it, to relax into it, to allow the emotion to play itself out. Maybe to read some non-dual poetry or listen to some beautiful music, whatever methods, yeah, whether methods is the right thing. When we suffer, it's good to try and trying is wrong as well, isn't it? It's very, very difficult to talk about all this stuff. Very difficult. There is sorrow, that's the fact, right? Most of the time, most of us are experiencing at least some sorrow. Sometimes we're experiencing immense sorrow, incredible amounts of suffering and pain and so on. And yet there is still love. There is still love. And there's certainly the potential to be aware of love. Okay, let's move on. That's kind of interesting. So without that quality, yeah, here he's saying exactly the same thing, but he's just swapped the order of words around. Without that quality of beauty, which is sensitivity, there's no truth. So just over here, he said, without beauty and love, there's no truth. So now, without beauty, which is sensitivity, there's no truth. Sensitivity is a word we haven't talked about. Sensitivity meaning awareness, isn't it? If you're aware of something, you're sensing it. It's sensitivity. Yeah, it implies empathy as well, doesn't it? Sensitivity, to be willing to be touched by something is sensitivity, to be open to an experience, to a perception. Oh, I don't know whether we can say this in this particular talk. We were saying that this is not a lecture, nor is it an entertainment. Entertainment means amusing yourself. Yes. Nor is it a mere matter of intellectual, theoretical, psychological pursuit. Rather, it is a philosophical pursuit. So this is interesting. In some places, Krishnamurti attacks philosophy. He says that's all meaningless words. But here he's saying, no, this that we're doing here is very important. Philosophy means love of truth. I wrote a paper a while back, but I still haven't published it, about meta-philosophy, saying that Krishnamurti is basically a meta-philosopher rather than a philosopher. But that's not the subject of this talk, so let's just move on here. It's just interesting there that he says philosophy is love of truth, and he's saying that that's what he's engaged in. That's what he's doing. Philosophy, love of truth. And I wonder if we can turn that round as well and say truth of love. In other words, making what we do, the way we live our lives, the truth, as an expression of love, which is kind of the object of the exercise, isn't it? Not just to sit quietly and feel love. I mean, that's okay. That's a very good thing to do. But love is action as well. Love is giving food to hungry people. Love is doing good things as well. It's not just sitting and talking about it. So yeah, all of that's interesting. Oh, I thought this was good. The word Vedanta means the end of knowledge. The end of knowledge, which is death. I think what he's saying here, I might be wrong, there's two ways to interpret that phrase. Is he saying that knowledge, which is death, knowledge is death because knowledge is the past, so knowledge is dead, it's not alive? Sometimes he makes that point. Or is he saying that the end of knowledge is death, in the sense that the ego, the me, dies when I give up knowledge? So both of those are possible interpretations of that. It's not entirely clear. Which means no time, timeless, which is love. Yeah, this is one of those great Krishnamurti sayings which people can argue about the meaning of. For me, what I think he means here is that love is here and now. There's no need to wait. There's no need to delay. There's no need to say love is going to come around tomorrow or after I finish this. You know, love is timeless, means love is here and now. Love is always present at all times. So that's that. What else do we have? Supreme order can only exist when there is supreme intelligence. This is a strange quote, isn't it? He almost sounds like the bad guy in a science fiction movie here. You can imagine Darth Vader saying something like this, can't you? Supreme order in the galaxy, something like that. I don't know, but intelligence cannot exist without compassion and love and death. Now, this is an idea I do know something about, the idea that intelligence requires feeling, requires emotion. Now, this is something they've come across in AI research, that if you make an AI intelligent enough to start having a conversation with it, it starts having feelings. You need feelings. Feelings are an essential component of intelligence. If you don't have feelings, then it's very quickly apparent that you're talking to a machine, not a person, because people have feelings. And anything that's intelligent enough to build a model of the universe, which includes itself within it, has feelings. Anyway, that's not really the subject of this talk. I'll try not to get distracted into this. Now, meditation. We haven't really talked much about meditation. Meditation, he says here, this is not a process of meditation, but deep, profound inquiry. Again, we've got this deep and profound. And as I mentioned earlier, I think this is quite important in the concept of love, that love is actually a measure of depth in a way, or measure is wrong, but love requires depth, requires profundity, which means complexity, which means that it's beyond the mind, because the mind is a very simple thing. The mind can only look very superficially. Certainly the conscious mind that thinks in words can only look very superficially. But love is something profound. I would say meditation too is basically about quitting for a while that stream of superficial words and instead looking at something a little bit deeper, which is reality, whether that's outwardly or inwardly. You can look at the complexity and profundity of the outside world, trees, people, and you can also look at the profundity of the inside world, the feeling of I am, and what is that? All these emotions and this body which we have. To have a human body is such a remarkable thing. The human body is so deep and complex and profound, so much more complex than we imagine it to be.
Peter,
Yes,
I'm
sir.
sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, sorry, I'm going on too long here. Yes,
Yeah.
please do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We normally close at 12:30, so can we close it in the next 10 minutes? Because there are some
Sure,
people who
sure,
want to ask.
anytime. I can go on like this whole day. so whenever you get bored, please just tell me and I'll stop.
No, it's a pleasure to hear you, but we have constraint of time.
Yes.
I think there are two people who want to ask you a question. One is, of course, Harshad Bhai, and then there is one more, Mr. Prasad Gogada, who wants to ask you something. Yes. So Harshad Bhai and then Prakash Godada. Yes,
Are
Harshad
you
Bhai.
able to hear my voice?
Yes,
sir.
Yes. I like to say, when you were talking about beauty, then people generally say that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, but Krishnaji says something different. He says beauty is when the beholder is not. That means when the sense of I or me, the observer, is not there, which means the mind is very, very silent, looking everything without the self. That is also love, and that is a beauty also. So love and beauty are both almost the same thing. And when you were talking about intelligence, I would say that intelligence is, the root meaning is to read between the lines. That means to see the essence of what we are reading or listening or seeing. And we can see the essence only when the mind is very, very clear and silent. Then there is this intelligence. And about the sorrow, I agree with Krishnaji that as long as there is a sorrow exists because there is an ignorance, and the ignorance of our own self, how our mind is working. But when the mind is very, very clear and silent, then there is no sorrow. And that is what intelligence and love and beauty, they are all same, or you can equate it to truth also. So I think I have finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Harshad ji. Mr. Prasad, please go ahead. Ask the question. Yeah. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, sir. Hi, Peter. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, mine is just an addition. So when we're talking about previous quote, which is like, where there is sorrow, there is no love. That is the one, right? So the easy way that came to my mind is, when I'm self-consumed, when I'm worried about myself all the time, I cannot love another. So there can't be love there. So that is the best way to understand. Mine is not a question. It's just an addition to what you are saying. So that might be the easy way. And one more thing that came to my mind is, previously when you're reading the quotes, they are more about not what is not love. So that is the best way to teach what is love, maybe. So many of the quotes when you're reading, it contains not, what is not, what is not. So when that may be the only way to teach what is love. Or else I'm not interested in love. I just want to find out what it is not. Yeah, it is. This I want to add. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Peter, you can close it in the next 2-3 minutes, and then we'll finish. Yeah.
Sir, you have to declare the subject for the next Sunday, one thing. And second thing I wanted to say, when absence is not felt, love is complete. Please convey to the guest speaker also. We will never feel absence of him.
And
No,
sir,
the-
can we get the recordings of these
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
of this
You
one
will-
and previous ones?
you will
on-
get.
They're on the YouTube within a day or two, so you can go to YouTube and look for Case Circle. You'll find it. Yeah.
Okay.
Harshad Parekh, Harshad Parekh, Harshad Parekh. Type Harshad Parekh, you will get it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So, Peter, in the next 2-3 minutes, you want to conclude?
Sure. Yeah, I think a few interesting points there. Often I find that we're with Krishnamurti, the statements that he makes are very absolute, and it's possible to interpret them in a very absolute way. It's also possible to look at it in a more relative way, as a spectrum of possibilities. So if we say sorrow completely blocks love, so if I have just a tiny amount of sorrow, then that completely prevents me from experiencing love. I don't think that's correct. And yet I'm not sure that's not correct. It's certainly true that there are times when I feel that there is absolutely no cause for sorrow, that there is no sorrow, and there is overwhelming love. These are kind of peak experiences, I would say, very blissful experiences, which I've had for a short time on many occasions. But most of the time, that's not my experience. Most of the time, my experience is there are causes for sorrow. I think it's interesting to say the cause of sorrow is ignorance. If that's true, then we can learn knowledge and thereby end sorrow. And I'm not sure it's quite as simple as that. I think there are a lot of causes for sorrow that are not ignorance. Old age, sickness, death, bereavement. These are all causes for sorrow. Other people's suffering. When I see other people doing stupid things and suffering, this causes me sorrow. So it's difficult to see how that necessarily obscures love. On the other hand, if we step back and look at the bigger picture, okay, there are people doing stupid things and there are people suffering, and I'm doing stupid things and I'm suffering, and yet look how beautiful the world is. The world is still full of beauty and love. And this world has been given to us for free. We're here. Maybe not for free, maybe we've had to work for it as well. But yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? In meditation, in a meditative state, there are many very blissful states where there's very little suffering. But I don't know about zero suffering. I don't know. Maybe there are states in which there is zero suffering. It would be nice, wouldn't it, to be able to live all the time in a state with zero suffering? Wouldn't that be nice? Yes. Is that possible? Is that what was Krishnamurti's state of mind? Is that what was Buddha's state of mind? I don't know. But what I do know is that I can work on myself. I can look at the causes of sorrow in my behavior and in my mind. And by looking at them and seeing them clearly, they change. And every time I learn something about myself, I change. Who I am changes, what my behavior is changes. And so this process of self-inquiry or self-awareness is very nice. And outwardly as well, when I see an outward cause of suffering, maybe I can fix that. And so this is life, this is human life. And teaching other people that this is life gives life a meaning and profundity as well. For those people who feel that life doesn't have meaning, who feel that life is all a waste of time and there's nothing better to do than smoke cigarettes and watch television or whatever it is that they're doing, maybe there's something that Krishnamurti can teach them and that other people can teach them about sorrow and the causes of sorrow and what love is, and love is beauty and so on. There was something that somebody said about beauty as well that was interesting. Yeah, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Yeah, and what Krishnamurti says is no, beauty is reality, and it's the eye of the beholder that limits the amount to which we see beauty. Aldous Huxley said something very interesting about that, which I've never fully understood, which is he said that the brain is a filter. So his idea was that there are countless beautiful insights floating around all the time, but our brains filter it so that we only see the narrow little set of insights that help us in our immediate biological survival. That's interesting. I think it's debatable. I haven't seen a lot of evidence to support that, but it's an interesting point. And yeah, definitely the point about beauty, that beauty is the objective fact. And when we look at something and we don't see beauty, that's probably our fault, and not the fault of the objective thing, because there's beauty and complexity and richness everywhere.
Thank you.
Maybe that's a good point to end on.
Thank you, Peter. I think it's a good question for all of us to look into. And thank you so very much for giving a beautiful and thought-provoking discourse. Thanks a lot. Maybe we can pick up the threads again sometimes in future and invite you to talk to us again. Thanks a lot. And next Sunday, we'll have Professor P. Krishna, next Sunday at 11 a.m. And he's going to talk about his journey with Krishnamurti and its effect on him. So you're all welcome to join if you have time. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you, Dubey ji. Just one share. मदर से इश्क का चलन देखा निराला, उसी को छुट्टी न मिली जिसको सबक याद हुआ. तो छुट्टी मिली नहीं रही है इससे, तो अब इसको छुट्टी डिक्लेयर करते हैं. मोडक प्लीज एंड इट.
Yes.